Ladies and gentlemen, we are under attack. Our very way of life, our very existence is threatened. They have already taken over Washington. They continue to destroy our Constitution. It is time to take back our country now.
The Wise Conservative Show, bringing wisdom back to politics.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is very unfortunate in the fact that I have to start out this show with the very sad news that US Justice Scalia has in fact passed away. Now, this is coming at a very unfortunate time for the simple fact that now the election cycles has considerably, exponentially upped the stakes of what is in the running right now. We'll talk about that as well as go over my analysis of the Republican debate that just happened in South Carolina. Yeah, it was a mess, but we'll get to that after talking about why it is so important. Absolutely essential if we want the conservative cause to continue, that a Republican president is able to appoint a Supreme Court justice. Now, I started the show about talking about the unfortunate news that U.S. Justice Scalia has in fact passed away. Scalia was a great man who really respected the Constitution and really understood the point of the Constitution. He knew that it wasn't a living document that could be changed to fit with the fads of whatever president and whatever party currently held Congress. He knew that the Constitution was a hard set of rules that needed to be abided by and could not just be manipulated and changed to fit whatever notion the American people seemed to have at the time. It is truly a sad day for the conservative movement, and it is a major blow to the conservative movement as well. And it is going to be absolutely essential that we are able to ensure that a conservative justice is once again appointed to fill the very big shoes of Justice Scalia. Now, all of this is coming in an election cycle, which has already been termed one of the most important elections of probably our time. The United States is at a turning point. We can either continue down the road that President Obama has prepared for the Democratic Party, has pretty much set the foundations for killing off whatever conservative ideals that the United States was founded upon, or we can go with a Republican president who will return the United States to the values and the foundation that we were built on and the ideals that made us the number one nation in the world. This has been at stake the entire election cycle, but now the next president, in all honesty, will most likely be the person who is able to nominate who will replace Justice Scalia, which will determine whether or not the Supreme Court remains an unbiased, equally conservative, equally liberal entity, or whether or not the Supreme Court will be full-blown dominated by the Liberal Party. That's what's at stake. What's at stake is not a Republican-leaning Supreme Court, because right now it is fair to say that the Supreme Court is very well balanced. Honestly, when it comes to decisions, not one side can already determine who is going to come out the victor, whether it's the left side or the right side. It's a fair and balanced court system, which is how it should be. Okay, I'm a reasonable guy. I understand that we don't need to have a conservative-dominated Supreme Court. That's not reasonable. That's not how democracy works. We don't need one party to dominate the other. But what we do need is a fair and balanced Supreme Court, the ultimate check of power against some of these illegal actions that President Obama and that Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders have pledged to continue to support and continue to enact. Because what we've seen under President Obama has been a president who has not been able to gather Congress support because the American people turned on the president when they realized how asinine he was. And so the American people elected a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate. That was the American people speaking. Yet we've seen that since the American people have spoken up, said what they thought about President Obama and his policies, he has ignored that and continued to enact unconstitutional executive actions on a wide range of topics that he is unconstitutionally not allowed to do. So if we have a left-leaning Supreme Court, I can guarantee that all of these illegal executive actions that President Obama has tried to take would be ruled legal, and the president would be allowed to legislate instead of executing the law that the Congress and the American people have put up in front of him. That is what is at stake right now. What is at stake is a fair and balanced United States that does not continue to promote unconstitutional policies. So a lot of you sitting at home are probably wondering why President Obama will not have the chance to nominate a Supreme Court justice, and why I'm going on this rant about why the next president will have this particular power to do so. Well, in all honesty, President Obama has already admitted that he would be trying to nominate a candidate for the Supreme Court. But what we have in our court as for the conservative movement is a Republican-controlled Senate, which is going to be absolutely vital to protect from this attack the left is going to be trying to serve us. You see, the Senate is the only group that actually has the power to appoint a Supreme Court justice. The president gets to nominate, but the Supreme Court has the ultimate power and the ultimate authority on whether or not that person is actually appointed a justice. So essentially you can think of the Senate as being the people who conduct the interview, the job interview for the Supreme Court justice. Well, seeing as we have a Republican-controlled Senate, it should be easy to understand that the Republicans have some power in preventing a left-wing wacko from being appointed to the Supreme Court. Now, what has yet to be seen is whether or not Republicans will in fact stand up to the president and actually delay the appointment of a justice long enough to find out whether or not we will have a conservative president who will then be able to nominate a better suited candidate for the Supreme Court. That is yet to be seen. And honestly, it's 50-50. Mitch McConnell has already promised to stall the appointment of a justice as long as possible in order to ensure that a conservative president or a conservative candidate has the chance to nominate a better choice. But we've seen time and time again under this Congress that the Republicans, even though we hold the majority, have been unable to have the backbone to stand up to the Democrats when the Democrats are unconstitutional or just plain wrong. We've seen that the Republicans haven't been able to stand up to that. That's why Obamacare was passed. That's why all of these executive actions have been allowed by the president. And that's why so many increases in spending and in the budget and in the deficit. That's why we are $19 trillion in debt. The Republicans have been unwilling to stand up to the Democrats from increasing the size of the government. They've been unable to stand up to the Democrats on just about any issue, despite the fact that we hold the majority. So it'll be really telling whether or not Mitch McConnell is able to delay the appointment of a Supreme Court justice that Barack Obama nominates. And what's really telling is the fact that there is precedence that when a Supreme Court justice dies during the last year, during an election year, the current president does not appoint another man or woman to the Supreme Court. There's an 80-year precedence on this, on waiting for the next president to have that honor and that duty to ensure that the voice of the American people at that time is heard and reflected upon in the Supreme Court. That's why this election has just gotten exponentially more important than it was. What is at stake is the future of not just the executive branch, of not just the direction that the United States is heading. What is at stake now is the executive branch and the judicial branch. That's two branches up in the air for one election cycle. And that's something the American people need to get right, because a Supreme Court justice is around a lot longer than a bad president. So if we elect a bad president in Hillary Clinton, that is going to haunt us for several decades, to be honest, depending on who is chosen. That is why we need to ensure that Hillary Clinton is not the next president, because she has already vowed that she would consider appointing President Barack Obama to the Supreme Court. Now, President Obama has already shown that he has no interest in defending the Constitution or following the Constitution. He's already demonstrated that he has no knowledge of how the United States federal government should work, and that he has no knowledge of the fundamental values, the fundamental ideals, and what fundamentally made the United States the greatest nation on the earth for a very long time. He's already shown clear interest that he doesn't care about any of that stuff, and that he does what he wants, when he wants, regardless of what the American people want. So it is very dangerous to be electing and considering the idea of electing a woman who has shown that she would put a man like that on the Supreme Court, one of the most important positions in the United States. A man who has no regard for the values that the U.S. Constitution holds, which is the number one job of the Supreme Court, to hold the values of the Constitution in the utmost regard and ensure that the actions taken within this great country adhere to the guidelines that the Founding Fathers wrote for us. But we have a woman who has promised to put one of the worst presidents, as far as following the Constitution goes, to the Supreme Court. It is essential that the Republicans do not lose this election, and that we do not allow Barack Obama to become a member of the Supreme Court, or you can kiss your Second Amendment goodbye. You can ensure that religious freedom for Christians is gone. What is at stake is the values and the ideals that the United States was founded upon and stands for. That is what is at stake. And so it's easy to see that Hillary Clinton is a terrible choice as far as ensuring the United States continues to value the ideals that we were founded upon. Now that we've established just how important this election cycle has been, let's go on and move on to talking about the other big news of the night, the Republican debate that occurred in South Carolina. The very first thing that stands out to not just me, but to a lot of people looking at Twitter and looking at Facebook was the fact of just how bad the moderators on CBS were. It was terrible. We had moderators trying to debate with the candidates. We have much too short of a time. We're down to 6 candidates. There's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't up the time that each candidate gets to speak, because it is now more essential than ever that we're able to effectively hear what each candidate has to say. But we're stuck with that 1-minute time, and we had moderators who would cut off candidates if they went over the time a little bit. We had moderators who wouldn't allow the candidates to actually debate each other when it started getting into an actual debate, and instead would turn and change the topic. Meanwhile, we had a moderator who wasn't even able to effectively convey his questions in a very good way. And we had a moderator who was just ultimately, it just felt disorganized. The whole debate did not feel as professional and as well done. And the questions, a lot of them were just very, very poorly executed. And so I thought that as far as debates go, this was one of the weakest debates as far as the questioning and the moderators goes. Now, if you want to look at the performance of the candidates themselves, it was definitely the weakest debate that I've seen for pretty much all of the candidates. Now, one thing that stood out to a lot of people, it was probably the easiest thing to see after the terrible moderators, was the fact that the candidates had a new kind of fire against one another. I've never seen a Republican debate yet during this election cycle that has been as heated as this one was. And it wasn't just the normal Jeb Bush, Donald Trump debate that was going on. You had Ted Cruz, you had Marco Rubio. They were all getting into it, and it made for an interesting debate, but it was ultimately, it felt, like I said a little bit earlier, it felt disorganized. As far as winners and losers go, no one in particular really stood out to me as being a clear and cut winner above the rest, but I thought a few people actually looked really bad and looked really petty to me. First and foremost, I'm a Donald Trump fan in a lot of ways. I respect the guy. I think he has a lot of good things to say, and I, for the most part, agree with a lot of his notions. But tonight, he looked absolutely petty. He looked like it was very unprofessional on his part. A lot of the attacks he was taking against Jeb Bush, they looked kind of just, they weren't very presidential of Donald Trump. He didn't look like a presidential candidate. He was throwing stuff out there that was true, but he didn't need to bring in a lot of what he was saying, and he needs to be able to take criticism against himself better. He didn't need to respond in all the ways that he responded against Jeb Bush and against Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, because at this point, Donald Trump has the lead by a lot. He needs to remember that, and he needs to make sure that he doesn't do anything to screw up his chances of getting a nomination, because that is all that can happen at this point. If he has debates like he had tonight, his support will drop because it was bad. As far as other losers, well, clearly it was Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush looked extremely weak tonight. He wasn't willing to admit the fact that the United States never needed to go into Iraq and that his brother's policy was failed. Donald Trump made a great point in pointing out that we were lied to. There was never any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Never. And President Bush knew that. He wanted to go into Iraq for his own personal vendetta against who knows why. But President Bush lied to the American people about there being weapons of mass destruction, and it destabilized the region. Donald Trump was fine for pointing that out. Donald Trump was perfectly fine. But what Jeb Bush needed to do was differentiate himself from his brother. Because right now, he has the name recognition of a Bush, but for a lot of people, a lot of Americans, that's a bad thing. But he has done nothing to differentiate himself from his brother. He hasn't really stood out and made the argument that he would be a better president than his older brother. So, for as far as I'm concerned, Jeb Bush is out of the race. He needs to drop out and stop spending $47 million in a state and then losing terrible. Another thing that I noticed as far as Jeb Bush goes, he had a lot of supporters in the audience. And it really made him sound like he was doing good because of all the applause he was getting. But you have to stop and realize that the people in attendance of these debates are the big donors who have donated to campaigns. So of course Jeb Bush is going to have more support in the audience. He's had more donors, more super PAC money than any other candidate, despite the fact that he has not been able to effectively capture the interest of the American people. So it makes perfect sense why he would have a loud audience. He's had a lot of people give him money to waste. So that was kind of clear to me, because every time Jeb Bush talked, there was a lot of applause. Donald Trump got a lot of booing, which again is normal. He's used to that. But it was very obvious that Jeb Bush had a lot of support in the crowd. And as a whole, Jeb Bush actually does fairly well in South Carolina. I don't think he's going to be another last place finish in South Carolina, but it will be interesting to see whether or not some of Donald Trump's remarks about President Bush not keeping the American people safe and allowing 9/11 to happen, it'll be interesting to see how that really influences the primaries in South Carolina, because right now he's showing a sizable lead in the state. it'll be interesting as well, going back to some of the comments Donald Trump made, talking about how Iraq was an absolutely terrible idea and destabilized the Middle East. And then he talked about how President Bush didn't keep the American people safe because 9/11 did in fact happen. Those are some more of the more moderate or left-wing sounding allegations that I've heard coming from a Republican candidate. So it'll be interesting to see if now that he's sort of showing his more moderate side, whether or not he's able to pick up some more of the independent vote. And whether or not now Trump believes he has the nomination in the bag and is going to start toning things down and start appealing to a wider audience than his extremely right-wing crowd he has right now, in order to ensure that he actually has a chance of winning the general election. As far as other performances in the debate, I thought that Kasich came off extremely fake, but he was more of that kid who did well kind of in one thing, but then gets all cocky all of a sudden because he had like one second place finish. He is clearly trying to play a more optimistic card, trying to bring people together instead of dividing them, but I just don't think it's working, and I don't think he has any chance of actually building up support at this point. The American people are mad, and Donald Trump has tapped into that anger in the Republican Party, and that is what is fueling him right now, is the fact that the Republican American people are very angry about the state of our country. So I don't know if now is the time to be optimistic. I think Marco Rubio is pretty much done, especially after his poor performance in New Hampshire and his poor performance in the New Hampshire debate. Chris Christie took some really big jabs at him. I noticed tonight he didn't really go to the same phrases a whole lot like he has in previous debates. I think whoever is his advisor was telling him to not sound so robotic. And I don't think this is the last we'll see of Marco Rubio, but I don't think now is the time in which he will be the nominee. He has a bright future ahead of him, and he's made some valid points, but now is not his time. As far as Dr. Carson, well, he just really needs to drop out at this point. It's almost painful to hear him talking because it's so slow and it's so uninterested. He's a very smart man, extremely smart. He might be a cool guy to hang out with, but when he's up on stage, he needs to find a way to capture people's interest, and it's just so easy to overlook him because he's so quiet. He's so slow to respond to things that I just don't think he could really fare very well in a debate against Hillary Clinton. If he was being attacked, I just don't think he could respond to those attacks, so I don't think he would fare well in the general election. So that leaves us with a handful of people left. I think Cruz. I haven't talked about him yet. Tonight, he looked good to me tonight. He stayed out a lot of the petty little arguments that were on stage over nothing to do with the election, and he had some very great responses. Especially, I really loved his closing statement. I thought he did a very good job of it. It was kind of easy to see that he was trying to pull in some of maybe more of Rand Paul's supporters. He went a little more libertarian, I thought. But overall, I thought Ted Cruz did a good idea. But why I'm not an avid Ted Cruz supporter is the fact that I'm not sure if he would actually be an effective president. He is the most hated man in the Senate. The Democrats don't like him. The Republicans don't like him. He's pretty much an isolated person that almost nobody likes. And that's fine. It's because he probably stands up and speaks his mind, and he doesn't conform to the Democratic or the Republican establishment. But what that is going to be a problem if he was president is the fact that the president has to work with Congress. He has to work with Republicans, and he has to work with Democrats, and he has to get things done. And if Ted Cruz was president, I'm not sure that he would be able to work with these people who don't like him and get done what needs to get done in order to fix the United States. And we can't have another president who relies on executive action when the Congress isn't willing to work with him. That's why I'm not so sure that Ted Cruz is a very smart choice, because even if he was elected, I don't think he could get done what he's promising. As far as these debates go, I'm to the point where I'm pretty much sick and tired of seeing them, and I love watching these debates. But we've kind of gone through all these issues, we've gone through all the important stuff so much that we all know where the candidates stand. We know that Donald Trump is going to get booed. We know that he's probably going to take some shots at Jeb Bush, and Jeb Bush is going to complain about him being a bully. We know Ted Cruz is going to try and stay out and play the more libertarian card and the experienced politician card, where he isn't afraid of the establishment, though. We know Rubio is the establishment favorite. Carson is probably asleep, and Kasich is going to play the happy-go-lucky guy. We're down. We know who is going to do what. We know how candidates feel. At this point, I'm sick and tired of seeing these debates because they bring absolutely nothing new to the table. What I really want to see is once more and more of these primaries start coming in, it'll be revealing to see if Trump continues to win or if he was a fad, which I don't think at this point. I think if he was a fad, he would have been out of the race months ago. And it's really interesting because when he started his campaign, everyone dismissed him. Everyone thought he was a joke. But now that he's stuck around for the whole time, pretty much the whole race he's been in number one by a lot, people are starting to take him more seriously. Or at least the media, some of the channels are starting to take him more seriously. And some people are actually starting to play with the idea that he will be the nomination regardless of what the establishment wants. And if there's one thing to take away from the 2016 presidential election, it's that the American people on either side of the aisle are sick and tired of the establishment, which has failed us time and time again by promoting their own interests in their lobbying and their special interest groups, and they continue to grow their wallets while the American people continue to struggle to live day to day because of the growing national debt, because of the growing disparity and the growing inability to get things done in Washington, D.C. that has left the American people sick and tired of politicians. Americans hate Washington, D.C. Americans are more willing to leave their car with a random stranger than they are to trust a politician. It's sad. Our government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. But the people don't feel like they have a say in Washington. Our government has grown so large, our government is so out of control that American people don't trust the government that is supposed to be created by them and for them and work for them. The American government is supposed to be a servant to the American people. Yet we have American people, we have the American population that doesn't trust it and wants change. That is why you're seeing on either side of the aisle, people are standing up and fighting against the establishment because they've come to realize that what we have now isn't working. We are $19 trillion in debt. We are on the verge of the largest financial disaster in the modern era. If the United States does not find a way to turn around our national debt, it will bite us in the butt at some point. We will have a depression that will make the Great Depression look fun. And it is going to kill our economy. It is going to kill the American people. And it is going to ensure that nations like China and Russia surpass us as the superpower that we once were. That is what is at stake if we don't clean up Washington and don't get rid of this national debt that looms above everyone's heads. And as it continues to grow, it will continue to get harder and harder to dig ourselves out. That is why the American people are sick and tired of politicians who spend money and don't care if they have it in their bank account. That's why we've seen a pushback from the against the establishment. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not that pushback continues and whether or not the establishment responds to it and how they respond to it. With that being said, guys, I'd like to first apologize that this video is 2 days late at this point. I had my laptop die on me, so I couldn't record on Thursday. But I've got new hardware, and I should be keeping to the schedule. I promise that next week will be out on time. Also, I'd like to give the news that Youth Revolt is officially live. We've talked about Youth Revolt in the past, so if you're interested at all, if you want to check out other great broadcasters, or you want to check out a great nonprofit working to take back our education system from the hands of the liberal indoctrination, be sure to check out youthrevolt.org. It's a great website with great people, and you'll love it. All right, guys, thank you for checking this out, and thank you for tuning in. Please like or subscribe or favorite. I don't know which website you're listening to this on. We're on lots of websites. Do whatever that website has you do. And with that being said, I look forward to seeing you respond. Look for our next episode coming out every Tuesday and Thursday. And my name is Dakota Wise, and I am signing off from the Wise Conservative Show.